Oh, hello. Today we are wrapping up December 2021 reading. This is the last wrap-up period for 2021, and it's the last day of the month, and just found out Betty White died, so honestly, kind of F you to 2021. It's been quite a year, hasn't it? It's just a real kick in the teeth before we leave the year. But I'm gonna try to put that aside and talk to you about how reading went for December. Now, I'm gonna tell you guys, it was going fine, and then the last week of the month, from Christmas Eve to New Year's Eve, I've had like one of the best reading weeks ever in my life. So we'll get into it. I definitely have things that I'm happy and excited about to share with you guys, and actually I have no disappointments, I feel like, for the month. I could have arbitrarily picked a couple that I guess were theoretically disappointing, but nothing that I really felt in my soul. So let's talk about stats and challenges, and then we will talk about my hits and my surprises for this month, because there were no disappointments. So in December, I read 19 books, 14 of which I owned, 5 of which I did not. The average age of book I read was 2 years old, and the average amount of time it had been on my TBR was 3 months. I paid for 36.84% of the books I read. The rest were gifts or publisher or library, whatever. I, on average, paid $3.34 per book that I paid for. Then in terms of genre distribution, maybe one of my most even genre distributions ever, because I had 5 speculative romances, but then I had 3 fantasies, 3 mysteries, general nonfiction, then I had some historical nonfiction, I had a sci-fi, I had general fiction. I had a little bit of everything. So it was very evenly distributed in terms of genre this month. And then in terms of ratings, very skewed upwards. So definitely my biggest rating I gave out were 4 stars. I gave out 7 of those. I gave out 3 4.5 stars and 1 5-star. Probably my best month of the year. I had an average rating of 3.73. That is like one of the highest average ratings I've ever had in a month. And yeah, this last week really crushed it in terms of just things that I was absolutely loving. So with that, let's talk about a couple of challenge things that I won't talk about in a hit or surprise category. Let's see, we talked about the Paradox Hotel as an arc already earlier in the month. Oh, okay, 2 for book club. I read Witchmark by C.L. Polk and A Marvelous Light by Freya Marska, and both of these I like. It's interesting. The reason Bethany ended up picking 2 books for December was because these are such similar books, and we kind of wanted to do like a compare and contrast. So things that these 2 books have in common: they are both set in a ye fantasy version of Edwardian England. They are both male-male romances. They are both fantasy and involve like a secret society of fantasy people in Edwardian England. And they both have like a whodunit mystery kind of conspiracy type plot to them. So these are actually incredibly similar books. However, it is very interesting because this one is much more weighted towards a serious fantasy tone, and this one is much more weighted towards like light whimsy. And because of that, I think this one was a more successful book than this one was. Now, both of them, I think, are not great at the world building. They're also both debuts, by the way. So I think you can tell in terms of the overall success, world building to the degree that you understood what was happening in the plot, particularly in this one. And that's why I think, because this one was going for a little bit more serious tone, and because I felt like this one wasn't as successful, so I gave this 3 stars. Still good, but like just not excellent. And this one I gave 4 stars to, because it read much more like just sort of a jolly adventure. I understood enough of what was going on to get the plot, even if I don't know that it was like always the most successfully communicated. Like that was kind of fine just based on the kind of tone it was going for. Yeah, I just felt like this reminded me kind of like House in the Cerulean Sea, in terms of like it's not that whimsical, but it's on the spectrum. But anyway, I was glad that we read both of these actually, because I think this was a nice study in contrast of how books that are very similar in their projects on paper can end up being quite different in terms of their execution and kind of how you get on with them. So yeah, I would read more from either of these authors. Pretty good debuts, honestly, for either. But yeah, anyway, I just thought it was an interesting little exercise here. And then I guess the only other thing I need to mention is that I've got 2 side Changeling books read for December. We had Shards of Hope, which the podcast episode has already gone up for this. And then we had Allegiance of Honor, and podcast episode for this will go up the 2nd week of January. So when you're watching this, this will go up next week. So these were my 2 side Changeling reads for December. And I think I'm going to talk to you about all the other books and challenges or arcs or whatever in a different category. So let us start with surprises, shall we? This is my little stack of surprise here. And I just realized that I actually was vlogging during reading all of these. So you're gonna hear more details in that. So maybe I'll just run through like what surprised me. I gave all of these 4 stars. So these are all 4-star books. Disfigured, Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Leduc. I think the reason I picked this as a surprise was that this was not quite the nonfiction genre that I was expecting. I was expecting this to be pretty straightforwardly just exploring portrayals of disability in fairy tales. Is that, but then it also does get into quite a bit of like theory around how disabled people conceptualize their own experience, how academics talk about that. So that was interesting. And then there was also biographical components to this, autobiographical components from Amanda Leduc because she has cerebral palsy. So there was also elements of that incorporated into this. I really liked each of these individual pieces. I don't know that they came together in a book totally successfully, like if I'm assessing this as a book, but content-wise, this is absolutely fantastic, really interesting. I listened to the audiobook and read. I kind of went back and forth, and the audio was totally solid. Yeah, all around, I think that this is definitely worth picking up. I definitely feel like I have a better framework with which to talk about disabled people's experiences and like my own ableism. Also, frankly, just as somebody who is now conceptualizing themselves as a disabled person because I have a chronic disease and kind of like getting my head around that, I think that this was also just personally helpful to me and like having some new language to talk about that. So yeah, I think this is definitely worth picking up, and it surprised me in terms of its genre. And then Hookline Sinker by Tessa Bailey comes out. This is an arc. This comes out in March, and I was really charmed by this. I think what surprised me in this was that I realized that I don't really love small town contemporary romances very often anymore. I like them as holiday novellas, and I like them from authors that I love, but I think that this just surprised me realizing, because I was reading this and I was like, this is a super well done small town romance. It also, I guess, surprised me because it's sold as friends to lovers, and I don't really know that it's exactly the friends to lovers trope. To me, it was more of a like, we've been platonic, but we've both been kind of into each other and we're finally just going for it kind of a vibe, rather than like, oh, I've been in love with you for years and we're finally like, this is finally happening. So it surprised me that way, but also I think like this is a really well done small town romance. I really liked that the hero was the one who kind of like had insecurities, and he was kind of the one dealing with that as his internal conflict. I feel like that doesn't happen all that often. The heroine also had that somewhat, but in a different way. She was basically like if you melded Kate Winslet and Jack Black's characters in The Holiday, like she was kind of a combination of them. So that was sort of the type of insecurity she was working through, but I was pleased to see this from a hero. I will tell you that the epilogue to this really sold me. Part of it is because I was reading this on Christmas Eve, and the epilogue takes place on Christmas Eve, and it takes place 10 years in the future, and it's one of the most like, I buy that these two are together and happy epilogues ever. I just felt like she really sold me on that. So, you know, it's Tessa Bailey, so like the sexy times went there, and that was appreciated. But yeah, I think this surprised me in terms of making me reflect on my own relationship with this subgenre at this point in my reading life. I used to pick up any small town romances. Those were like my favorites. And then seasonal work from Laura Lippman. This is a collection of short stories. This is the first time I've ever read something from her, but it will definitely not be the last. Now, I will say that there are highs and lows. That's typically the case in a short story collection. It's very rare for me to read one and be like, every single story, 10 out of 10. I mean, that's why, for instance, I love like Aidi and The Bloody Chamber. Like there's a few iconic short story collections that I absolutely love. Flannery O'Connor, like some people really, all of them I love. This particular one was not that. None of them were flops, and I really liked a lot of these and loved some of them. The reason I put this as a surprise is because my favorite short story in this collection is called, I think, Slow Burner. Yeah, it's called Slow Burner, and it's about infidelity, which if you guys watch this channel, you know is usually a hard sell for me in any genre. Like I don't like it in a romance, I don't like it in general fiction, I don't like it in a mystery, I don't like cheating plots in general. This was a story about cheating that I actually loved. It was my favorite one in the collection, and I don't want to spoil it, but I really love that story, and so that was a surprise to me. I was like, oh, my favorite one features a trope that I don't like, proving that sometimes it's good to try something or to read something that isn't typically something you would enjoy because, you know, you might surprise yourself. So that was the surprise here. And then we get into my hits. So yeah, okay, so there's one 4-star hit that I don't have in physical form because it's not out yet. I read an arc of Black Love Matters by Jessica Pride, edited by Jessica Pride, I should say. This was an incredibly thought-provoking collection. It made me really reflect on my own position as a white woman who reads and reviews Black love romances or romances by Black authors, romances featuring a Black hero or heroine. Really made me reflect on a lot of that. In particular, so there were some great history essays from Beverly Jenkins, Queen Bev, nailed it, as well as, I'm forgetting her name, but she's another author who also has a history as an academic. Let me grab my Goodreads because I think I said her name there. And my battery died while I was looking for this person's name. Okay, her name is Margot Hendricks. Her and Queen Bev's sections on just like the history of Black love and romance I thought were really interesting. There were some close readings of certain texts, including a section that was doing a close reading of Alyssa Cole's How to Catch a Queen that I thought was really good. Yeah, anyway, like that, most of the collection I thought was thought-provoking good. The one that really stuck with me and what really made this a hit for me was from Christina C. Jones, and I have like 5 of her romances on my Kindle and I need to get to them at some point. But basically she was really it was a very thought-provoking essay because she was really challenging this idea of who is a Black love romance for. And she's really pushing that it's not for white readers and reviewers, but not in like a you can't read this, but just like kind of an empowerment or a sort of like call to arms for Black writers who are writing Black love romances, that your audience are Black readers, so like be unapologetic for writing for them. And it was very thought-provoking to me as a white reader and reviewer. So I really enjoyed that essay and found it very thought-provoking. So yeah, anyway, this one was one I enjoyed because I like literary studies in general. I really like literary studies of romance, and this also added in that kind of like layer of social issues and history to it that just made this a real thought-provoking collection. You know, there were highs and lows in it for me, kind of similar to what I was saying about seasonal work. There were things that I liked and better than others, which is why it was 4 stars rather than 4.5, but overall very thought-provoking and certainly worth picking up. So you guys should definitely seek that out in February. We're now moving into the 4.5-star territory. So The Whiteness of Wealth by Dorothy Brown. This was nonfiction that was just like aimed at me because it was about tax law and I have an accounting undergrad degree. So it was like tax law and social justice together with history. So like the project of this book was just completely up my alley. Basically, it's this professor. She is a Black woman who specifically chose tax law as her specialty because she didn't want to have a specialty that would force her to constantly be thinking about her place in the world as a Black woman. But she had a mentor who challenged her to think about like how she could use her area of expertise to expand scholarship or like overall understanding of systemic racism and how that impacts Black Americans. And so she started thinking about tax law and how the functional realities of what is supposed to be a neutral system end up disproportionately penalizing Black Americans. And I just thought that this was so interesting. She talks about particularly, like, one of the areas that most stood out to me was how, for instance, like the marriage benefit that the US tax system in theory gives to married couples actually ends up disproportionately being a marriage penalty for Black couples versus white couples, because Black couples are much more likely to have relatively equal salaries, and therefore it would actually benefit them to file separately as singles, whereas if one spouse is making more than the other, that is really when the marriage benefit for taxation tends to kick in. And that is much more likely to be the case for white couples. She talks about the history of how that even came to be a thing and how it was these very rich couples lobbying for certain rules about marriage and tax law. She talks about, like housing credits and deductions for education. I mean, she covers a lot of different areas of tax law. And I just thought it was really interesting and very compelling. I mean, I'm sure that people could like pick apart some of her arguments, but very compelling about how something that we all in the US we don't like our tax law. I think most people are pretty resentful of the fact that there are all these loopholes that the ultra rich are able to exploit. So I do think that there's a general feeling that like that piece of tax law is not fairly applied. But I don't know that I'd ever really thought that systemic racism was impacting how the tax code functionally ends up getting applied to people. I guess I just have never really thought about it from like a race perspective. So I just thought this was super interesting. The audiobook was good. I really liked the audio and then picked up a physical copy. So yeah, I just thought this was very interesting and thought-provoking and just up my alley. Really enjoyed that. Speaking of audiobooks I really enjoyed, oh my gosh, I read Razorblade Tears. I got the audio because that was recommended to me, I think by Jess from Jess Owens and a couple of other people on a live stream I was on. This book, man, it is just like, it made me cry so much because it's basically a revenge/conspiracy thriller. This gay couple are murdered in what appears to be a hate crime of some kind. It's like very violent. One of them is Black, one of them is white. The Black husband was a journalist. He was working on like a very hot button story, and both of their dads are ex-cons. And the Black husband's dad, he has like really turned his life around coming out of prison, started his own business and really like bootstrapped it, versus the white husband's dad has always kind of been a little bit of a screw up. And neither of their dads were very accepting of them as gay men when they were alive. But when they are killed, they kind of start to come to a reckoning and like start to realize how much they failed their sons as fathers because they couldn't get past this element of their identity. And when they realize that the police are not doing anything or like they're not making any progress on figuring out who did this, they team up to solve the murder. And on the way, they cover a lot of shit with like this motorcycle gang and politics. Like it's a whole conspiracy thriller kind of vibe to it. This is a very violent book, by the way. So know that's definitely described on page. The first time the dads have like a violent encounter, I was like, oh, okay, we're going there. It was quite graphic. And then there's also a lot of like on page described homophobia. So just know that as well. But when I tell you that I boo-hooed in this book, I mean, the number one way to get me to cry is anything having to do with complicated father-son relationships. This is why 75% of the episodes I've ever seen of Queer Eye kill me. You just want your dad to accept you. Toxic patriarchy is depriving you of this ability to have this connected relationship with your father. This is so sad. But this is really a book about regret, man. Like, this is a book about these two dads really coming to grips with the fact that they were not who their sons needed them to be as fathers, and then specifically that they are regretting that they let something like sexuality keep them from being able to fully be a part of their sons' lives or like fully connect with their sons in the way that they now wish they could. And they are dealing with a lot of regret from that and trying to make it right in the only way that they really can at this point. It killed me, man. Like the final pages, I literally just like, I was reorganizing my pantry, I was vlogging, and I had to like set everything down and just sit there and like cry for a little bit because it was just so much. But it was great, and definitely now would be what I don't remember what I ended up voting for in the Goodreads Choice Awards, but I wish it had won because it was really good. There was a couple of moments, like the trope combo wasn't always my favorite, so there were just moments where I was like, I don't know about this, but in general, so good. I should read more from this author because it was great. And then my last book of 2021 that I read, and probably my favorite 4.5 star, was Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. This is a mystery whodunit, and this is a great example of why sometimes if you are not in the mood for a book, you should just put it down and wait until you are in the mood for it because you might like it better later. I DNF'd this book when I first started it because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It's a book within a book. And I wasn't expecting that. And also it was making direct claims to be like Agatha Christie. And I was just like, I don't know about this. So I put it down and I came back. That was probably 2 years ago. I came back to it because I was in the mood for that kind of story, that kind of project, and it delivered in spades. Now, I will tell you, tone-wise, this is still not really an Agatha Christie read-alike. So if that's what you want, this doesn't... The book within the book is very directly a pastiche of Poirot. This guy's name is Atticus Pund. He is a German immigrant in post-war Britain. It's in like a little town. It feels that part feels very Marple. There's the Lord of the Manor, small village conspiracy. He has a sidekick named Fraser, who I immediately was like, oh, that must be Hugh Fraser. Hastings in the ITV Poirot series. Like, it is very directly playing on Agatha Christie tropes, but the tone and the writing isn't that sort of like lovely, effervescent Christie writing. So like, if that's what you want, this isn't gonna give you that. But if you just want those tropes, oh my gosh, this totally scratched my itch for that. And then the setup is that you basically read the book within the book, and then there's a last chapter missing, and you come back into the real world and you're trying to find out what happened to that last chapter, what happened to the author, and like mystery whodunit there. So you get 2 whodunits and they're both very satisfying. I had moments of problems with both of them, which is why this is a 4.5 rather than a 5. But overall, this just scratched my whodunit itch so perfectly, and I can't wait to read the next one. I'm so glad that I didn't force myself to continue finishing this book when I wasn't in the mood for it, because I loved it now. And I would have like either DNF'd it or not loved it when I was first trying to read it. So great example of why you should at least temporarily DNF books if you're not in the right mood to read them. And then my 5-star read. This has been more than a year in the making. I have been reading the Realm of the Elderling series just to get to the Mad Ship, because from what I'd heard about it, I thought I would love it. And guess what? I did. This is one of the best books I have ever read. Probably period, definitely within fantasy. This is one of the best fantasy books I've ever read. This is long, but this is long, following a cast of like 20-ish characters, and has like 4 or 5 plot lines going in it. I was interested in literally every plot line. I was interested in every character. There was no part of this book that I was not into. Now, I think Leanna said that she felt like it was dragging towards the end. I didn't feel that. I felt like it was kind of a ramp in the first half of it, but then like once I got to the halfway mark of it, it just really, everything kicked into gear, really got going. I have so many theories about things that might be getting set up. I kind of want to do a separate spoiler video review of this. Maybe I'll do that right after I finish filming this, but I have so many thoughts and themes in this. It is so good. I cried at certain points. I'm really interested in the character development. I guess I just need to do a spoiler video. You need to at least read Ship of Magic before you can read this, which is an 800-page book. This is a 900-page book, and really you should read the first 3 books in the Farseer trilogy before you even get to that. Reading this book made me glad that I put in the time to read that original trilogy, because while I definitely have things I really liked in it, I didn't love that original trilogy. Like, the sum of the parts is definitely greater than the whole with it. Like, overall, I would call it like almost a 4.5 star kind of trilogy. But this book made me really happy that I had put in the time to read that trilogy, because I saw things starting to like connect in my mind and starting to pay off. This is such a good book. It is so good. It is as good as people told me it was. And it was definitely a 5-star. So this was what I read on Christmas Day. Well, I'd been reading the first half of it during the first half of the month, but then I really sat down and finished it on Christmas Day, and it was a great Christmas Day read, and I loved it, and it was so good. 5 stars. So yeah, that was what I read in December, and that's it for 2021, guys. On Sunday, you will see my stats and superlatives wrap up for 2021, and then we will be well into 2022, onwards and upwards. Let me know how your reading in December went. Let me know what you thought about any of the books that I talked about. And yeah, I think that will do it for me for this video. So if you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!